So I want to start by saying thank you everyone for coming. My name is Cody Armstrong, and also on the line with me is Ethan. Ethan will be able to help with any questions that you have. As I always say with these webinars, we really encourage you to ask any questions as we're going through this. Now, today's topic is on using FeatureScript features. So if you haven't seen, recently we announced a new programming language called FeatureScript, and it allows us to write custom features, maybe specific to your application, or all kinds of neat things that you can do via this programming language. But what I want to focus on today are really two things: introducing everyone to FeatureScript, and then showing how to use FeatureScript features. And that's really the key thing that I want to spend my time on, is walking everyone through how to add a custom feature and how to remove a custom feature, how to use some of the custom features. And the key thing, again, is you don't necessarily have to write code. And I'm going to go over this throughout the webinar, but really want to focus on using FeatureScript from a non-coder perspective. If I'm not interested in writing code, but I want to use the features. So a quick question that's popped up is FeatureScript JavaScript, and it's important to point out it is not JavaScript. It is JavaScript based in that it's what it's supposed to look like, but it is not exact JavaScript. So, getting into the topic, one of the first things I want to get into is, of course, what we're going to cover here today. And I've already briefly mentioned it, but of course, introducing everyone to FeatureScript. I want to show you what FeatureScript is, kind of go over in a high level how you might use it and why it makes a difference. And then I want to go over how to find FeatureScript features. So if you want to add one of these features to your toolbar, if you want to start using them, I'll walk you through that process. So we'll walk you through adding it to the toolbar, and then also, of course, using the custom feature. And I'd like to take some time today to really highlight some of my favorite custom features that have already been created that you can start using. So that's really a rough agenda. We probably won't use the full hour, but we'll see. All depends a lot on the questions, so feel free to ask them. So let's jump into things. Now, as I mentioned before, I really want to introduce you first to FeatureScript. And the key thing with it is, again, it's a language for defining custom parametric features. So if you've ever wanted to build your own CAD feature, that's essentially what FeatureScript allows you to do. So it's an entirely new programming language, JavaScript based. It was invented specifically for defining parametric CAD features. So its sole purpose is a language for building custom CAD features. The key thing with FeatureScript is it's really the core of Onshape. It was built into Onshape since the very beginning. So when you click extrude command, for example, you're running FeatureScript. It's kind of the backbone of everything that we do in a part studio in Onshape. So FeatureScript is really the core of everything we're doing, and you've been using it all along without even knowing it. The extrude, fillet, shell, loft, all these commands were written using FeatureScript. So it's already been used millions of times by lots and lots and lots of users. So a language for defining your own custom parametric features. That's essentially what FeatureScript is. Now, if you think about this, all CAD systems have features. Whether it's SolidWorks, Creo, Inventor, Onshape, we all have a list of features. The key thing with these features is they're generally proprietary to the CAD system that created them. They're written by a CAD company. You can't really alter them. You can't make changes. If you wanted to build your own variation, those aren't publicly available to you. But they are, again, a fixed list of features. The idea behind Onshape's FeatureScript is, if you've ever wished that you could change how a feature works, I like this command, but I wish it had this option. If I've ever wished that, I had this certain feature that could build a door frame automatically, for example, chances are you can write that with FeatureScript. So if one of those features that you dream up that you wish you could create, that's another scenario where you might use FeatureScript. And so oftentimes, if you're using more traditional CAD system, you might go the enhancement request route, where I submit an enhancement request. I say, please build my door frame feature. And if you're lucky, they do it. It's traditionally not very quick, maybe a process of years, if at all. A lot of times those enhancement requests go unanswered. And so the user's then resorting to something like an API or a macro. The key thing with those is they never generally feel the same as a built-in feature. They have to have their own interface built. And it's just not the best process when we're talking about working back and forth with complex geometry. the key thing with an API as well is you really don't know how the core functionality is written. So you're really just calling features that have already been written, this standard, extrude, revolve, so on. But you don't really get to see how those things function. So these are just kind of the things. If you've ever wished that you had a feature that worked a little bit differently, if you ever wished that you could build a custom feature for yourself, you're a prime candidate to consider using FeatureScript. The neat thing that I want to point out here is if you're interested in writing your own code, and I know there are many out there that will never write code and they don't care to, and that's fine. I'm going to show all of you how we can use already existing features. But if you are interested in how to get started, maybe creating your own feature, one of the biggest references I can point out is we are publicly releasing our source code for things like extrude and fillet and shell, pattern, loft. So all under an open source license. So you can take a look at the code that is used every time you click the extrude command, for example. So it allows you to really get a prime example of how you might generate an extrude command. And the neat thing is you can copy and reuse it. So if I've ever wanted a custom extrude command with a custom option, I can take the extrude command source code, copy it, and build my own feature with my option. So we're publicly releasing the source code for our entire library of features under an MIT open source license. So we're releasing this source code under a license that allows you to copy it, and it also allows you to copy and monetize. So if you wanted to write a feature and then charge others for it, you could do that as well. So the big thing, though, I think from a new user perspective, if you're trying to learn to code, these are great examples of existing code for existing features, especially if you're interested in taking it and building your own version of it. You can copy the source code and build your own extrude or pattern or whatever you may want. And the big thing is you can share it, which we're going to cover here today. If you wanted to share it publicly, you certainly can. I'm going to show you a lot of examples of that here today, or you could sell it, right? And hopefully soon we'll have a mechanism for you. But as of today, we're using Onshape's share mechanisms for those that want to distribute their code. So one last thing, actually, I think I have one more slide after this, is a note about security. So some things that I want to point out, and these are just frequently asked questions when we're getting started. There are some things that custom features cannot do, and this is a very important thing to point out when you're getting started either using features or writing your own. You cannot modify anything other than the part studio where a FeatureScript feature is used. So you cannot have a malicious feature, so to speak, that changes parts outside of where it was created or where it was used. Another thing to consider is that it can't infect your account in any way. So it can't, change account settings. It can't do anything like that. It's really, you might say, sandbox, so to speak, to only creating custom features. So it doesn't have a way of communicating with the person that created it, which means you can trust code even if you don't necessarily know the author, right? Because it's impossible for that code to communicate with its author in any way. It's impossible for it to change account settings. It's impossible for it to modify other features. So you can't create code, so to speak, that deletes all the sketches in a part. It can only create and delete from within that script. So its impact is fairly limited for the idea of security. You don't have to worry about custom features, causing things to fall apart. Right. The worst thing that can happen is the feature fails and you have to remove it from the feature list. You have to delete it. So there really isn't a lot of users out there concerned about things. Well, if I use a script from someone I don't know, should I trust it? It's impossible for it to really cause a lot of harm. The worst thing it can do, as I said, is cause your part to fail to rebuild, and then you would have to delete it from your feature list. So you don't have to worry too much about using features, if you don't necessarily trust them. And the important thing too is I think a lot of these situations, a lot of the code I'm going to show you today is publicly available. You can look at the code itself to see what it does. Is there a way to protect or obfuscate FeatureScript? There's a process. This is something we hope to improve soon. If you hope to distribute your code, it will be very important. There is a process right now where you could insert that feature into its own document without the Feature Studio, and then share that document as a way. So there's mechanisms. I don't want to go too much into detail with them. I think that hopefully we can improve this process soon. Question: can FeatureScript source a public document for data? I want to right-click a menu to insert a 20 with a link into assembly, having the various profiles available in a document. Yes. Public document would be a great way to accomplish that. So to recap that question, can FeatureScript source a public document for data? I want to right-click menu to insert 80/20 aluminum option with X length. You can absolutely do that. In fact, I've seen other examples of that. So just for reference, you can find an example of just that, I believe, in the FeatureScript section of the Onshape forums. So, all right, moving on. Now, the last thing I want to mention again is, the impact of FeatureScript features is really limited to creating geometry. It can't do anything malicious, so to speak, besides potentially creating a slow feature. I think that's kind of the worst case scenario. All right, so moving on. What if I don't write code? And you're really the key audience here, because I want to show you how to use FeatureScript features, not writing them, but using them. So we have a long list of publicly available features that's growing very quickly, and you can start using any one of these today. So I'm going to show you kind of my favorite top 10 of the custom features that are available for you today. And the big thing is that users can add anything that's been shared with them or publicly shared to their toolbar. So if a example has been written and been publicly shared, you can add it to your toolbar, or if it's been shared with you, which means I can hire someone to write a feature for me. So again, if you don't write code, there's still a lot to be gained from using FeatureScript features, either from others or from publicly available examples. Quick questions: can the App Store access and run a FeatureScript? Right now, there's no integration between App Store and FeatureScript. That's something we're considering for the future, so definitely on our radar, so to speak. Are there any safeguards of building custom features on top of an evolving code base? That is, if I have a feature that leverages the extrude code, what is the underlying extrude code option changes in a way that breaks my custom code? And it's important to point out that every FeatureScript feature is designed with the intent that you should be able to write it and leave it alone, and it will regenerate consistently regardless of what changes happen in the future. So you should not have to constantly update your features with every change that happens to Onshape. So that was very much a high priority when building FeatureScript. Will there be a future webinar on coding in FeatureScript? I was hoping to learn more about code. I would definitely check out the Introducing FeatureScript webinar that we have. I walk through a simple example of writing a custom feature. There's also videos I'm going to show you in just a bit with regards to getting started. Also, I'll show you some links and documentation as well. Let's say I take a public FeatureScript, use it, but later on the owner changes the feature sharing options and hides it. Will I still be able to use it? Yes, you will not be able to update if that user changes it, but if it was public and you inserted that feature into your document, it's there to stay. All right, so moving on, let's jump into things. Now, one of the first things that I want to point out for those just getting started is on our webpage. If you go to onshape.com, one of the most important references, especially for those want to learn how to write code or look at all the various examples I'm going to cover here today, on our homepage under CAD, you'll find our FeatureScript webpage. And the reason I bring this up is it has a lot of valuable links. Every example that I'm going to walk you through, you can find a link to here. So you can find a link to the public document. You can look at the source code. If I scroll down here, there's a video on how to use or insert custom features. There's a video on how to create your first feature. And also I mentioned we're publicly releasing the source code. This is the source code. So there's a link to the source code for all of our Onshape features, right? This is the source code for our Boolean command, for example. So again, very important. I think just if you're getting started, there's links to documentation and tutorials here. There's links to the FeatureScript section of the Onshape forums here. Just really try to put everything in one place for those that are just getting started with FeatureScript. Okay. So again, just a valuable resource. If you're just getting started, go to our homepage under CAD, the FeatureScript section. You'll find nearly any reference that you need for either just using features like we're going to do here today or writing your own. Okay. All right, so this is the FeatureScript page. What I'd like to get into next is adding your own custom features. So let's jump over here to the adding custom features. Let's say, for example, that I just want to use one of the existing features. And by the way, if you're curious, jumping back to that page real quickly, this is the list of features that is publicly available to you today. So you can use any one of these and not write a line of code. Literally just a few clicks and you can add any one of these commands to your toolbar. And there are a few more I'm going to show you. I'd like to highlight about 10 of my personal favorites, but definitely worth checking out. These are all publicly available and the source code is available. So you can go through and review the source code for any one of these examples. All right, so real quickly, question. Can FeatureScript generate documents like tables or dimensions in a text file? I think in that case you would be looking more towards our API, and that's an important distinction. With Onshape, we have an API that allows you to access your documents programmatically, and then FeatureScript is really specific to building that custom feature. But if you want to export or import information into your document, you're really looking for the Onshape API. The API, by the way, is not public yet. You can request access to it, but as of today, it's not publicly available. Hopefully, we'll have the API available soon. But again, FeatureScript kind of fills that different niche. It's really geared towards building a custom feature, building something that may be specific to you. A few examples that I'm going to highlight here today. Things like the point pattern and the port feature, very useful. If you do a lot of gear generation, you create a lot of gears, there's a dedicated feature for that. Plastic injection molding. If you do plastic injection molding, things like snap hooks and screw bosses are very common parts. And so we have these specific tools that, and this list is only growing. FeatureScript has been publicly available for I think 2 or 3 weeks now, and we've already got 15 examples, and we've got many more coming in. So long list. I want to go through and highlight just some of my favorites here. All right, so jumping back to the tab here, let's say that I have nothing and I want to generate a spur gear. I want to automatically insert a spur gear and then use that spur gear maybe in a part studio, maybe in an assembly. So how do I add a custom feature to my toolbar? How might I do that? And one of the first things to realize is the Add Custom Features icon in the top right corner. So you have Add Custom Features. If you left click, you'll see the FeatureScript Samples filter. And this is one of the most important icons I can point out here because this is a list of curated features. This is a list of features that we've gone through and reviewed and listed as great examples of FeatureScript. So if you're looking for anything that's on that page that I showed you a moment ago, it's in the FeatureScript samples list. Okay. Now, by the way, you can go through public documents. You can search. So if you know of someone that publicly shared a document, but it's not on that list, you can search through your documents. You can search through your own documents. So if you wrote your own script, you can search through and add it as an icon to your toolbar. So you can use the general search options that you have in Onshape. But the FeatureScript samples, I think, was where a lot of people will start. And like I mentioned before, it's really just a list of a lot of examples. So if I wanted to generate a spur gear, for example, I would want to add the spur gear feature. Right, so left click, select the spur gear feature. Right, and what you'll notice is now I have an SG tab added to the toolbar. Right, so I can use this FeatureScript feature anytime I want. It's just another icon, no different than extrude or fillet or any other. Right, so now if I want to generate a spur gear, I literally just click spur gear. Right, so now it's generating spur gear. I can enter some values. The neat thing is this feature has a lot of different options. I can set the module, the pitch circle diameter, the pressure angle, all these things, and build this gear on the fly. Right. Once I'm satisfied, I hit the green check, and now I've used my custom feature, in this case the spur gear, in my document. Some things I want to point out. This icon, the spur gear feature, stays in your toolbar until you remove it. And it's in all your documents. So you don't have to add the spur gear feature to each individual document. Once you add it, it adds it to your toolbar for all Part Studios. So this document or others, you will see that SG icon there. We're going to go through how to reference drawings and work with linked documents using FeatureScript. Not necessarily going in through anything specific to referencing drawing. It's important to point out FeatureScript cannot create drawings or alter drawings for that matter as of today. Right now, it's really, again, specific to building custom geometric features, 3D features. Question, if I add a FeatureScript to my toolbar, is that added to my toolbar across all documents or just the current one? It is added to all documents. So when you add an icon like I just did, you are adding that icon to all documents. Is it possible to generate icons as of today? No, it just uses the 2 letters of the custom feature. That's something that we've heard from others as well, though, so thank you for the feedback. When creating a FeatureScript, is FeatureScript automatically prefixed in the FS name? No, that's just something we've done to distinguish them from others. And that's just something we've done to, again, kind of highlight those particular features. That's not a requirement. Can the icon be changed? No. How does the toolbar behave with many additional icons? They will show up under a drop-down menu. So our entire interface scales quite well, by the way. So if I drag this over, you'll see drop-down menus appear for all the various options. And if I had many custom features, it would drop down as well. If a document uses a lot of custom features, can they be grouped? It is important when in the UI that if there's a lot of them, they will automatically be put together in a flyout, but you don't have any control over that. Okay, so this is the spur gear feature. And again, all of these features that I'm going to show you here today, the next 9 or so features that I have here to show you can all be added to your toolbar by doing that same process. So whether you're looking for spur gears or you're looking to generate multiple planes at once, or you're looking for patterning parts at points, there's lots and lots of examples I can give. But all of these can be added to your toolbar today. These are all freely available, and you can even copy them and tweak them if you wanted to, make your own versions. So that's adding a custom tool to your toolbar. Now, again, as I mentioned, it's in your toolbar for all documents. So the question often comes up, well, what if I want to get rid of it? What if I don't want that command? What if I don't like that feature and I don't want to see it on my toolbar anymore? You can just right-click and remove, and that will remove it from the toolbar. Now, because I used this feature, the reference still exists. And the question came up earlier, what if I make a document public and then, or a link to a public document and then it no longer is public? It's important to keep in mind, anytime you've inserted, it remains there. Even if the document gets unshared, even if, the document gets deleted, it will remain in that feature list. Okay? Now, you'll also notice, and this is a question that came up from earlier, what about something like linked documents? All of these FeatureScript examples that I'm showing you here are all using linked documents. So when you insert that spur gear feature that I was showing you a moment ago, you're linking to a document called spur gear. And the neat thing about it is you can update these. So if the user that designed spur gear decides they want to add a new feature, they can update it and you'll get a notification. You can update to the latest. So all kinds of cool stuff with custom features. But it's important to point out they are using, in fact, you'll see the little link symbol here. It is linked to a document called spur gear. Can FeatureScript be used to create more than one part? A frame generator or frame consists of multiple frame elements, perhaps with additional bracketing. Absolutely. You can create many parts using FeatureScript very easily. Question, will FeatureScript be written today, or today we'll be creating features from the toolbar? Today we really want to focus on using the features, not necessarily creating the features. I would definitely recommend checking out our introducing webinar. I went through creating features in a real basic level. I would definitely check out that webinar if you're interested more in the writing of features. Maybe if we have a bit of time at the end, I can walk through creating a custom feature, at least getting started. So adding custom features is very easy. What I'd like to do is now show you some of these features. So let's jump into one of the examples. What I'd like to do is walk you through a lot of these examples, and not just necessarily the features themselves, but also maybe glance at the code and see how they were written. Now, in this case, this is the same feature I was just showing you a moment ago. So this is the spur gear feature, except there's several of them. And the neat thing about the spur gear feature is you can position the gears with sketch vertices. So it's very easy for me to lay out all my gear locations and then just use the spur gear feature to generate each of the various spur gears. Okay. So just neat thing that I want to point out. And again, all of these are just documents. So when you insert that actual icon for spur gear, you're linking to this document and actually this feature studio. Right? And so for those looking to get started, looking for how you create your features, this is the actual code that generates the spur gear feature. So this is publicly available. You can use it as an example, maybe if you want to generate a variation of this. But again, all FeatureScript, all the code itself, is just another tab in your document called a Feature Studio. So you'll see it here in the bottom right. And so the integrated development environment, it's all built into Onshape. You don't have to have a development kit or manage it separately. It's all built in to Onshape itself. But this is the source code that generates that custom gear feature. Okay. And again, you don't have to write a line of this if all you want to do is use these features. Just like I did here, this is that spur gear feature used in a totally separate document. Again, because it's publicly available, anyone can use it. Okay. So this is the spur gear feature, definitely one of my favorites. Now, a question that's come up, can you please show how to access source code? Again, I would refer you to the FeatureScript webpage. Every one of the source code for each one of these features is in a link here. So the spur gear feature that I just showed you, if you click use it, it will take you to that document. And you can click on the Feature Studio and view the source code. Okay. So a link to each one of these examples and the actual feature is on the actual webpage, okay, our FeatureScript webpage. Also, by the way, at the very bottom is the source code for Onshape's existing features. So if you want to look at our extrude command or revolve sweep, any of the features in the Part Studio, you can click view source code and then go through and look at our source code as well. Okay, so both of these can be found on our FeatureScript webpage, okay, which, by the way, you'll find under CAD. So Onshape under CAD, you'll find FeatureScript. All right, so a few questions. Can we view them to see how they work? I will show you the feature studios for each of the features. We don't necessarily have time to explain each and every one of them, but I will show you the code for each and every one of them. Again, keep in mind, you can create your own copies of these. So if you want to take a look at them, you can. Will Onshape staff filter the scripts merging options from different versions, or do we have 10 instances of my extrude feature cluttering up the FeatureScript library? The FeatureScript samples is a curated list by us. And much like our linked documents, if there is an update, you'll get a prompt to update, but you don't have to. So that list is curated by us. It will not be cluttered up. Now, if you're doing a search for a feature, of course, then you're doing a search through our public document list. There may be many instances of it. Can you please show us how to access source code? I mentioned that. Is there a debugging capability? Absolutely. We do have a debug function. I would definitely check out our documentation and walk through. It's very simple. It's debug plus the feature you're trying to debug. Good question. Can FeatureScript be assigned to 3D Connection 3D mouse button assignments? I do not believe so as of today. I'm pretty sure that's a limitation. Forgive me. I would need to try it for certain, but I'm fairly confident that we can't as of today. All right, so moving on. I showed you the spur gear feature. This is personally one of my favorites. I think it'll be one of the more popular ones. But there are a lot of others that I like to point out here. And this is multiplane. And I think this is particularly useful if you do a lot of maybe complex lofts where you need to create multiple planes at once. With what we have today, you would have to create them individually. So this is a really neat capability. It allows you to grab things like model edges or complex curves and generate a whole series of planes at once. Now, I'll start off with a simple example of it. So we'll run the multi-plane feature. And you have two options. So the very first thing that you have here is a list of your options. I want a simple offset of planes. I select the reference face. In this case, we'll select the top plane. And then I just specify the distance between them. Right, so there's 2 inches between them and the number of instances. Let's say a dozen planes. So now I'm inserting a dozen planes, 12 inches, or excuse me, 2 inches apart, size 6 inch. And you can set the size of the plane as well. Okay. Again, particularly useful if, for example, you're creating a complex loft where you need many different planes evenly spaced. Now, it's not just many different planes evenly spaced like that example. You could use something like a model edge. So let's say multi-plane. I'll choose the curve point example, select the edge, and we'll automatically insert planes evenly spaced along that edge. So there's 12 evenly spaced planes along the model edge. Okay. Again, you can set the size. Also, I like to point out that's very neat with this capability is it actually adds a point where the edge intersects the plane. And so again, if you do a lot of this kind of modeling, you'll know that using that point where the plane intersects the geometry can be particularly helpful for constraining your sketch. So again, you can automatically add the points if you prefer. There's an option not to, but very easy to use. Right, so you can use a model edge. I can select something like a curve, right, or a spline, for example. This is a spline, and I want, let's say, 10 planes evenly spaced along that spline. Okay. And it can even be something like a straight line. So I can do, curve point. We'll select a straight line, and it does evenly spaced planes along that line. Okay. Another example that gets asked is something like a curve or a helix. And this is another example where, again, you just select the curve, in this case a helix, and you can do as many instances along that geometry as you'd like. So this is one of my personal favorites. This is multi-plane. It allows you to do just simple offsets if all you're trying to do is insert a number of planes at once. But again, the probably the more complex tool here is the ability to create all these evenly spaced planes along a model edge or along sketch geometry. It just really saves you a lot of time, especially if you're doing really complex shapes, things like complex lofts, for example. All right, so that is multiplane. Now the code for this is actually very simple. So if you go through it, again, you have your options. So I have the option for offset and curve point. Then I go through and define my user interface. So things like the amount of offset that I want, the face that I want to query in the case of a simple offset, the length, opposite direction options. So as you go through the code, you can really try and, piece together what's going on here. The logic behind this is pretty straightforward. If it's a simple offset, you're going to run this code, right? It just grabs the values and iterates through with each instance that you have in your number value. But then if the curve point option is checked, it runs through this code. Right? So again, very straightforward. I think, if you look at these examples, they're fairly easy to figure out what's going on in many situations. Also in these examples, they're fairly well commented. So you'll see comments in here describing what some of these things do. We've all tried to do our best to highlight, what it is we're trying to accomplish with the code. Okay. So this is the multi-plane feature. Let's move on. Now the next one is another one that's, again, incredibly powerful, and that is the ability to pattern along a curve. And so this is the curve pattern. Very simple. You can specify part, face, or feature that you want to pattern, and then you can click actual features. Right? So I can go in and select, I want to pattern these planes, these holes, these connecting bars, all these features. And then I can say, okay, well, I want to pattern them along an edge or a particular piece of sketch geometry, for example. And the neat thing about it is the pattern instance will actually follow the edges that you're selecting, right? So here I want to pattern these linear bars along the sketch geometry path that I have. Right? This will automatically pattern them all along that geometry, and it will rotate it to match the curve. Now, this is a particularly robust command in that you have all kinds of very cool options. Some that I like to point out is you can specify patterning by pattern count, which means I want 10 instances total, or I can say, you know what, I want 1 inch between each instance, and I don't care about the total number. I just want evenly spaced 1 inch apart instances of them. So you have all kinds of cool stuff that you can set. I'm not going to go into too great a detail on the curve pattern. It's definitely a very powerful tool, but it allows you to create complex shapes like this very quickly. The other example I like to give is it's also very easy to create something like spiral stairs. So this is another example I like to show with the curve pattern, where literally the curve pattern is rotating around the direction specified. Right, so very cool feature. Again, this is probably one of the most robust features, the custom features that we have. Very cool stuff. All right, so forgive me, I've missed a few questions here. Is there a way to tell how solid a published feature is? What if someone publishes a broken or buggy feature? Is there some way to tell that a feature is tested or working other than try and use it? Maybe a user rating mechanism. This is definitely an area that we're going to improve in the future. The ability to distribute features more in some kind of a format. Maybe it's a marketplace, for example, for distributing features and also giving the ability to review features, very similar to our App Store, for example. That's not something that it will be in the very, very near future, but that's definitely on our radar for soon. In terms of testing it now, you can try and use it, and if it fails, of course, you can just simply delete it. So there's not, the worst case that you have to do is delete the feature and remove it from your toolbar. It certainly is, more than I would want to do, but it's not a huge amount of hassle. But the other thing I would say is if you stick to the FeatureScript samples filter that I was showing you, that is a list of features that we have curated. We have actually gone through and tested them in some reasonable scenarios. Now, they are not as robust as an actual Onshape feature, and that's an important thing to point out. This curve pattern feature has not been vetted in the same way as an Onshape feature, where the QA process is involved. There's a lot of various steps with releasing a real feature, but the neat thing is that you can all use these today, and they work in many different situations. Now, is it simple to access or modify the source code or to use FeatureScript on the mobile as it is on the desktop? You can use the features on mobile, which means you can generate a curve pattern from your phone, for example. You can't write FeatureScript features yet from a mobile device. That's something that's browser only at this point, but you can use them. Could we part on specified points defined in the sketch of the curve? That's something you could tweak the design to do. Yes, forgive me. If you're referring to part is split it up into pieces, yes, you could do that programmatically using FeatureScript. But it doesn't follow the orientation of the curve. It absolutely does follow the orientation of the curve in that example, and in fact, in both of these examples. When using FeatureScript in document, does it create a document or does it create a copy, or is it linked to the original FS source, open to change by the original creator? It is linked to the original FS source. However, it will only update if you decide to update it, and if, of course, the user updates the code and creates a new version. So it's important to point out, even if you create a feature by another user, you don't have to worry about every little change they make affecting your feature, right? It's only versions, and you do not have to update it. So you can insert a feature and worry about it never breaking because of changes or updates to it. Is it possible to create a symmetric pattern? What I mean is you can create a pattern that will automatically center itself from each end. It sounds like it. It sounds like that could be done with a mirror command. Maybe I'm missing a detail. It sounds like you could do that with mirror today, but most likely, if mirror doesn't give you what you want, you could probably accomplish that using FeatureScript. Does Onshape check out private feature scripts to ensure integrity? No, we don't have the technical capability to look at private documents. so we can't inspect FeatureScript that's private. Now, if you want to publicly share your code and you want to let us vet it, we can even add it to our webpage. I would definitely create a forum post in the FeatureScript forums and post it. That's kind of going to be our mechanism for vetting these features and so on. I would assume that FeatureScript documents can be made private and shared. Is that right? By default, when you create a new FeatureScript feature, it is private. And any FeatureScript, any documents you create in Onshape by default are private, but they can be shared, yes. And the neat thing is, if you create a feature, you share it using the same share icon that you'd share your document with, the big share icon on the top right, and define their permissions. So you can share and collaborate on features. You can work together in real time on a feature. And you can also version control features. So if you have version 1 and you want to stamp that and always go back to it, you can. You can version control them as well. So they really behave just like any other Onshape features, Onshape documents. All right, moving on. So that is the curve pattern. Definitely worth checking out, especially if you're doing those kinds of patterns along strange geometry, curved geometry. Now, the next two features that I have are really kind of specific to those doing injection molding, but if you're doing a lot of this type of work, you'll know that there's some steps in it that are kind of tedious, simple extrudes and things like that you just often do repeatedly. And one example of this is the snap hook. So you have a simple snap hook to snap two plastic pieces together, and the shape is generally the same. There are some variables, but in general, the shape is always the same, right? You might enter a different height or different width, but in the end, it's just a variation of those things. This is a great example where FeatureScript can be used. So here I've got the sketch point locations, and I can select simple points, and it creates snap hooks at those sketch vertices. Okay. I can define a different height. I can define whether or not they have a cutout or whether or not they have draft. You have undercut depth settings, lip height settings, thickness settings, all kinds of neat settings. And again, this is, if you're doing a lot of injection molding design, a very important thing that you might do quite often. So that's a simple snap hook feature. And again, the source code here publicly available so you can go through it. So very simple source code. When you really get down to the key here is you have all of your code that actually executes. So define all the locations I click on, grab the target bodies, and then go through and actually define the feature itself. Okay. So key thing to keep in mind with this one is it's really just creating a sketch contour and extruding some shapes. In general, that's all it's really doing. It's just doing it programmatically, with a few additional options. So that is the snap hook feature. The next one that I want to move into is the screw boss feature. And this is another one that if you're doing injection molded design, it's a very common process, and that is creating these circular bosses to attach screw holes to. And so there's another example under screw boss where I can just click some points, and it creates screw boss features at those points. Okay. You can specify the boss height. You can specify the number of ribs, if any. You have options to remove ribs altogether. You have, again, options for things like draft, chamfer, and so on. Okay. So definitely two very cool tools, especially if you're doing a lot of injection molded design. And very great examples if you're looking for a way to programmatically construct a sketch with a feature and extrude like up to a surface, for example, or up to a blind depth in many situations. So again, here's the code for it. Pretty straightforward. But if you're learning, understand that when you're just getting started, taking these and starting here may not be the best approach. You may start with something like a simple pocket fillet example or a simple plane example like I was showing you earlier, where it's much fewer lines of code. This command has a lot of options and therefore a lot of code to go with those options. All right, so moving on, the next example that I want to show is the wave spring feature. And this is just an example where you can really push the limits of what you can create programmatically with FeatureScript. So here's the wave spring. and you click wave spring, and it generates a wave spring. So it constructs all the sketch geometry, all the loft geometry, and does it automatically. And you can specify different diameters, right? And it will update live. It will also add make connectors on the ends automatically. And again, it makes it really easy for you to attach this thing to the assembly or to the part studio that you're trying to bring it into. So this is the wave spring feature. Another example where, again, it's just constructing geometry programmatically and assembling it based on a few variables that you define. Okay. So again, another example of something you can add and start using today. Now, moving on, the next example that I have for you is actually one I wrote, and it's called the point pattern. And this feature allows you to pattern parts at sketch points. So let's say, for example, I have this cylinder, and I want to pattern this cylinder at all the corners of this part. This is a scenario where linear pattern isn't really ideal. You could technically use it here, but it's something that would be a little bit more complex. What I really like is I just want to be able to pattern the part at all the concentric points to those arcs. So I choose point pattern. I select the part I want to pattern. Okay. Then I select a reference point. Now you don't have to select a reference point. It can use the default center of the part as a reference, but in this case I want to specify the bottom here as my reference point. Then I can just select other points, and it will pattern that part to those other point locations. Okay. So really useful if a circular or linear pattern really isn't what you're looking for. You want to pattern a part, but it's not necessarily evenly spaced or circular for the example. Now, in this case, by default, it will assume that you want to create new parts, but it's important to point out all the Boolean operations are here as well. So if you want to pattern a part and then use it to create a cut, you can use the remove option. If you wanted to merge this feature with others, you can choose add, select the part, and now all of these bosses are merged with the plate itself. Okay, so you have the Boolean operations, but the big thing is it allows you to pattern a part at sketch points. Can you add an orientation option for every single pattern you reproduce reference edge in one step? You could do that, absolutely. You could take the point pattern example, for instance, add another query to it to select an edge, for example, and then align the part with that edge, for example. But with the code that you see here, so this is the code for it, and this is only 60 lines of code. So great example if you're looking to get started and you want to make a small change. You can take this and tweak it and create what you'd like with it. But that is the point pattern, essentially just patterns parts at sketch points. Okay. All right, moving on. The next one is called a fill pattern. Essentially what it does is it takes a face and fills a face with that reference. Right? So let's say, for example, I want to create a whole series of holes along this plate. Maybe this is used, and I want, it's bolted to a controller, and I want ventilation. So I want a lot of holes in this plate. I want to fill this face up with holes. That's a great example of the fill pattern. So you'll choose fill pattern. Face to pattern is this hole. Right? Target face is the face I want to pattern or fill. And then direction, I just specify a direction I want to pattern. Then it will go through and fill the entire face with whatever feature I've selected. In this case, a simple hole. Right? But if you're looking for a way to pattern a face across in another face, so you can pattern a certain feature across a whole other face, you can do that and fill the entire face with that feature. Some neat options that I like to point out, you can specify a border. So let's say, for instance, I don't like that this hole is too close to the larger hole. And I want to specify I want a minimum border distance around all the edges of 10 millimeters. And you'll see it actually removes instances around the border that were closer than 10 millimeters. Right? Same goes for distance. I say, okay, no, I want 15 millimeters between each instance. And now the density of that pattern increases quite a bit. Right? So that is the fill pattern. I think this example is a good one where you're trying to create a whole series of cuts, maybe for a event or something like that. All right, so that is the fill pattern. Moving on, rib. This one is aside, probably right up there with curve pattern. This one is a very robust feature and allows you to do all kinds of neat things. So I want to show you a few examples of this. I'm going to choose the rib command from the toolbar. I want to choose the sketch profiles that I'd like. Okay, so we'll just choose, let's set our thickness. Let's set it to 1/8 inch. And then I'll just start selecting sketch profiles. Right. Now I want to merge these with this part. And as soon as I do that, you'll see it's automatically offsetting all those sketch profiles and extruding them into the surface normal to the sketch plane. Right? So all I essentially have to do is draw a line, and it automatically offsets it and extrudes it into the face. Very useful, again, if you do a lot of injection molding where you have to have uniform ribs for strengthening or for those kinds of purposes. All you really want to do is draw a line and have it offset and extrude into the face repeatedly. And this is a great example of that. Now, that's a simple example. All I did was enter a thickness, select the edges that I want to rib, and then select a part to rib them into. But this thing can do a lot more than that. So, for instance, here is a rib where my sketch was actually created in a different normal direction. So I created the sketch in a normal direction very similar to this. But what I want is for this rib to go into the actual angled piece. There's another example where I can use rib, select the sketch profile, select my part, but instead of using normal to sketch plane, I want to choose parallel to sketch plane. And that will allow me to take a curve that was generated using an entirely different normal direction and extrude parallel with the sketch plane that it was created on. So perfect an example like this where I want to extrude into that angled piece. Okay. So that's another example where rib is useful. Now the next one, by the way, rib feature, here's the code. One of the more robust features, so you can imagine a few more lines of code than some of the other examples. But this is particularly robust when we start talking about complex shapes. So here's a spline, for example. I'll choose rib, choose the spline, my part, and notice that it automatically ends the rib at the edges of the part. So not only am I using spline geometry to drive the ribs, but it's smart enough to detect the edge of the geometry and stop there. Now it's not just one part at a time. I can select multiple edges. So here's a second edge, and there's the second rib in the same feature. And I can even rib multiple parts at once. So here's a second part I'm adding, and now this one rib feature is creating ribs in two different parts, right? Using two different sketch entities. So again, very robust command. The other example I like to give is this option for extend profiles up to part. So here you'll see I just have some random lines in space. And what I'd like to do is say, okay, I want to take this line. Okay, we'll merge it with this part. And I want to extend the profiles to the ends of the part. And so this means it's very easy for me to select just a series of incomplete lines and have it automatically extend out to the boundaries of that part. Okay. All right, so the last example, the last thing I want to point out with rib is that it's just another feature, which means it can be patterned, mirrored, circular patterned, all in the same way that Onshape features can be patterned. So all of these features are just another feature in your feature list. You'll see the rib feature, point pattern, everything I've covered up to this point shows up as just another feature in your feature list and behaves as such. So here's an example where I've linear patterned a rib in both of these. Okay. All right, a few questions that have popped up. Is this a Part Studio or an assembly? It's important to point out FeatureScript is specific to Part Studios. It's about creating features, so that is strictly in the Part Studio. But I can't use FeatureScript features. It says no document found. Have they not allowed yet? you should be able to use any one of these features that I'm showing you here today. If you haven't, go to our webpage, click the link. That should take you right to it, right to the actual feature itself. And then you can even add it from here, by the way. This is another way of adding a custom feature to toolbar. You can add it here. But you should absolutely be able to open up and take a look at any one of these examples. Okay. All right, so I left off with rib, and rib is definitely one of the more robust FeatureScript samples that I can give you. It works in nearly any type of situation, and you can see why when you go through and look at the code. Now, one of the last examples I have is actually one I wrote, and it's a very simple example of generating SAE ports. So if you do a lot of hydraulic port design where you have to create these ports for specific hydraulic valves, for example, it's a very tedious thing. It's a complex revolve profile, and it's an example I like to give because essentially it's the same shape over and over again, but there's all kinds of standard sizes, and so each size has its own dimensions. So this is an example I've built. It's very simple. You select port feature, you define your SAE port size. So let's say a half 20. I can then just click points. Okay. Any point automatically gets a port feature added. Right? And you can even choose points in different directions. So here I've got all these points going in a single direction. If I choose this one, it takes the normal direction of the sketch point and determines that's the direction it should create the port feature. Right? So definitely check that one out. This is a real simple example, by the way, and I built this one. I know there are users out there that like SAE ports, but I think there are many more out there that just generate any kind of port. Whether it's a hydraulic port for a valve, or there's lots and lots of examples I can give you of ports. The neat thing about this is it really shows you how to construct simple sketch geometry and revolve it. So here I've got all my various port sizes. Then I've got, allowing you to specify the port size, all the points where you want to put ports, and setting the depth. Really, from there, it's just a matter of defining all the vector locations for the ports. So you'll go in to define individual vector locations. You can even take this port, copy and paste it, and insert your own vectors and build your own custom port feature using this. So all it does is it defines all these various vector locations for the different port sizes. Then it just simply says for each point that you select, sketch lines constructed using those vertices and revolve cut them. Right? So very simple script, literally 200 lines of code, and most of it, I would say, is just defining all those port sizes. From constructing the sketch, saying for every point you select, construct the sketch and revolve cut it, is actually fairly simple in terms of the code. Okay. So that is the port feature. And again, these are just, I've tried to highlight 10 of my favorite. There are 15 examples, I think, now, all of which you can check out, all of which you can start using today, and all of which have the code available to you. So you can take and change it if you want, or use it as just an example for building your own feature. So it's a neat thing to point out that, many cases, I used something like the standard doc to figure out how I might do a revolve cut, or how I might do the point pattern. So lots of great examples, not just in our open source code, but all of the features I've shown you here. All right, so we are out of time. I want to say thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm going to stick around and answer any questions, so feel free. Don't feel like you're in a rush. I'm going to stick around and answer any questions, so stick around. But that's really what I had for you. I want to say thank you, everyone, and have a good day.